So in most of the previous iterations of Diablo 4, it didn't really make sense to run minions for the Necromancer in the endgame unless you were playing a specific Ring of Mendeln build. However, with the changes that came in Season 2, there is a completely new build that is looking quite powerful indeed that I can't wait to share with you. Now this build does rely heavily on the Overpower mechanic as its damage source, and with all the buffs that came to Overpower in Season 2 and its rework, it is looking extremely powerful, and not to mention a lot of the updates to Blood Necromancers and minions in general are helping this build, such as Blood Orbs healing minions for their maximum life as a baseline passive, and also some of the changes to the blood related passive, such as the one that was previously healing your minions as a skill passive has been changed to, on a lucky hit, you can actually generate additional blood orbs, right? With the original effect becoming the aforementioned baseline passive. And not only that, but this lucky hit effect actually synergizes with the new updated Rathma's Vigor key passive, where now whenever you collect blood orbs, you actually reduce the cooldown on Rathma's Vigor to allow you to overpower much more frequently. And in addition to that, if you get the new item, the Blood Moon Breaches unique pants, which by the way you can now farm from one of the endgame bosses in Season 2, your minions will even have a chance to curse enemies to make them take additional 70% extra multiplicative overpower damage from you, which is massive. However, the wording of this item does imply that your enemies can in fact be affected by any of your curses, so it can be like Decrepify or even Iron Maiden, and doesn't have to necessarily have to be a curse coming from this effect. Which means you don't necessarily have to run any minions for this effect to work, although I'm still going to make a case for why running minions might be a good choice for this Overpower build anyway. And more specifically, this build actually is founded upon an already established and of course viable Bloodlance Necromancer endgame max roll guide, but I've actually made a couple of adjustments to accommodate for a more, I suppose, fun in a way, relaxed playstyle with slightly more AoE options and not having you have to always aim your blood lance perfectly, for instance. Although if you do want to, play that way and have a more fast-paced and potentially, of course, more powerful playstyle with the max roll guide, of course you can offer that as well, right? But my build would just require a slight few adjustments to accommodate some minions and also make a few adjustments to legendary aspects and so forth. And another thing is that this build leans quite heavily into Thorns because I did swap out a couple of things from the actual existing guide for Bloodlance to a more Thorns oriented build, also primarily because of a specific vampire power called Jagged Spikes, which does seem quite intriguing. It has a chance for you to deal up to 300% multiplicative, which is huge, extra damage from your Thorns, and also chill enemies, which can be helpful too. And having this Needle Flare aspect instead of Sacrificial aspect originally on the actual build, because I am actually using some minions, so this aspect becomes less valuable for me. Instead of that, so I have Needle Flare aspect here, because it'll actually shore up my AoE a little bit with this build, because Bloodlance is kind of like somewhat of a single target focused build. Yeah, if you use Gore Quills, you will actually allow yourself to shoot additional lances, but I thought the additional small AoE was good in case you're like overkilling enemies with your blood lances, right? Especially when you're dealing huge damage with Overpower, you don't want to be prioritizing like the super weak targets with your blood lance anyway, right? So I thought the Needle Flare aspect was a good way to shore up a bit of AoE to get rid of the weaker targets with Thorns, and then have your blood lance prioritize the stronger enemies, which is what it should be to be a bit more optimal, I think. So my build does lean very heavily on Thorns damage, although with Bloodlance you're still going to be dealing the vast majority of damage from that and Overpowers, but I thought there was a pretty decent gap even in the established max roll build guide where I can incorporate not only minions but also Thorns, and I'll get to that in just a bit. But anyhow, I am using the only minions I'm using are the defenders. So if I just show you my Book of the Dead really quick, I've sacrificed skeletal mages for overpower damage. You can't really not do this. And then golems, I've also sacrificed the blood golem for maximum life, so both of these will contribute to overpower. Whereas for my skeletal warriors, The normal sacrifice is with crit chance, which is arguably quite significant, but I don't think it's nearly as significant as the other two sacrifices that directly benefit Overpower. Well, crit does as well, but these two I think would suffice, and then instead, for my warriors, I took defenders and also allow them to increase the amount of thorns they inherit from me. And with that, my other skills are, besides Raise Skeleton, I have Bone Storm, but this is more of a flex pick. You can also run something like Decrepify or even Blood Wave instead. But for now I have Bone Storm because later on when you get enough cooldown reduction and you get the Flicker Step boots, you'll be able to reduce the cooldown on your Bone Storm, allowing you to get the defense uptime as well as critical strike chance uptime on it. And there's also, by the way, a Vampiric power which reduces your ultimate cooldown by 20%. So whereas previously a lot of builds would utilize Decrepify, or more specifically Abhorrent Decrepify, to proc lucky hits to reduce the cooldown on Bone Storm. This build, because I have to use a slot to raise skeletons with, if I don't take Decrepify, I won't have this effect to reduce my cooldown on my Bone Storm, right? But instead of that, I think using Flicker Step combined with the Vampiric power to reduce cooldowns or ultimate cooldowns, and also things like cooldown reduction stats on your amulet, can greatly help just reduce your or increase the uptime on your Bone Storm quite consistently and very well. And besides that, I'm pretty much just running standard Bloodlands skills. So Corpse Tendrils combined with the Grasping Veins aspect to increase my crit chance, and here I'm taking the Blood Orb generation from it, the passive that is. And then of course I have Blood Mist for the Unstoppable and Invulnerability, although I suppose that's kind of a flex pick too, but it's generally good to have, especially for things like boss encounters. And then I have Hemorrhage as my basic skill, and also of course Bloodlance being the bread and butter skill, which once you are in endgame you should be able to very comfortably spam Bloodlance with the aspects that you'll be able to using and all the blood orbs that you'll be generating, the essence you'll be getting from that, and also the overpowers that you'll be doing with that, and with a lot of the attack speed increasing synergies that are in Season 2 as well. Skills, I took Hemorrhage up to Acolyte's Hemorrhage for my basic skill, and then Bloodlance of course, and with Supernatural Bloodlance to guarantee overpower and also spawn additional blood orbs. Here I also have Imperfectly Balanced for the multiplicative core skill damage. Down here I have 1 point in Hued Flesh for just a little bit more corpse generation, especially against bosses or single target damage fights. Here I have the Ghastly Blood Mist to leave behind a couple more corpses, which can smooth out gameplay a bit. And notably here I actually took Spiked Armor, and you can definitely pick this up early on for some additional thorns, which by the way scales with your level. So I have this maxed out. And then going to the next part, I actually don't have any curses here. I actually don't need this either, right? Since I'm not running Decrepify. But you can also run Decrepify combined with Amplify Damage for some increased damage. Or later on with enough cooldown reduction, you can definitely go with Bone Storm. But I currently just have Bone Storm here, but this is definitely interchangeable with Decrepify if you want to run with that instead, right? Here I also have Death's Reach for some increased distant enemy damage. Down here, I have basically all the blood passives maxed out. Transfusion is the new passive that we got, replacing the old one that healed minions whenever you picked up a blood orb, with that one becoming a baseline, right? So that's a great update and a buff to minions with blood. This is quite good, or all of these blood passes are very good. If you're leveling up, you can probably take up Coalesced Blood first for some consistent damage. And then later on, as you gain more lucky hit and are able to spam Bloodlance more consistently, the ones with lucky hit, namely Transfusion and Drain Vitality, are gonna be a bit more valuable with that, right? But anyhow, you want to max out all these. Of course, you also want to take Corpse Tendrils to get the Blighted Corpse Tendrils for additional blood orb generation. Next, you want to take, I actually took Standalone for some damage reduction. It's 18% minus 2% per minion. Since I'm only using skeletons and it's 4 skeletons, I still have a pretty high 12% damage reduction just for this, right? Here I'm not using Memento Mori, so that frees up a few points because I'm no longer sacrificing both warriors and mages, right? But then the points that I freed up from amplified damage, now I'm going to allocate into some of the minion survivability stuff. So I can definitely put some points here. I can also put some points back into Skeleton Warrior Mastery as needed, right? I'll probably take a point out here. So I can put like 2 points here in Skeleton Warrior Mastery, and then have the Death's Defense to increase your survivability further, and then also have Inspiring Leader, because this will actually buff your own attack speed too. And of course, Bone Storm you want to max out, and Rathma's Vigor is a huge part of your DPS because whenever you collect Blood Orbs, you can now reduce the cooldown of it to allow you to overpower more frequently. And for my gear really quick, again, I've made some changes compared to the Maxual build to account for not having the Decrepify to reduce my cooldowns on the Bone Storm with, and also to have more Thorns, right? So anyhow, I'll just go through everything, starting with the core for Bloodlance. I basically kept the entire core from the Maxual build for an effective a set of Bloodlance aspects, starting with Gore Quills, so you want to be putting this on your two-hander, which is the same as the Maxual Bloodlance build, and this will allow you to conjure additional Blood Lances from consuming your Blood Orbs. And in addition to that, you also want the aspect of Rathma's Chosen on your amulet. This actually comes from the Season Journey in Season 2, so it is an easy way to pick this up, and all the more reason to run this specific build, right? Or a blood build in general. And then you also have Band of Potent Blood. This is actually from a dungeon as well, so it's a good way to maintain your essence by collecting blood orbs, which you will be generating from your blood lances, right? And next, I actually have Needle Flare Band here. This primarily is to replace Sacrificial Aspect with, because again, I'm not sacrificing all minions, and this will, in theory, help you prioritize more important and stronger targets with your Blood Lance by allowing your Thorns to take care of the weaker enemies first, right? So that you're not wasting your Blood Lance on a lot of overkills. And for another offensive aspect, I actually have Grasping Veins. This is also standard though for any Blood Lance build, and it's also on the max roll one. In terms of defensive aspects, I have Disobedience, very standard too. Here I actually have Razor Blade for additional Thorns, but this is kind of a fun choice, and I thought, I would lean into the Thorns playstyle, with Defenders of course, and with them inheriting more Thorns, which I've taken this passive with in my Book of the Dead. And I'm also excited to see how much damage 20,000 Thorns at the new item power cap can actually do, which does seem quite high. But if you want a more defensive option, you can go for something like Might Aspect, or if you're running Bone Storm, you can also go with Shielding Aspect on any of your defensive pieces, right? Especially if you're going to be having higher uptime on Bone Storm. But for legs, if you can, you should run the Blood Moon Breaches for additional overpower damage, as I mentioned before. For boots though, I'm thinking of running Flicker Step since I'm not running Decrepify here, although I could potentially, replace something with it. But Flicker Step can also help reduce the cooldown on your ultimates by just evading through enemies, right? And if you combine that with having like cooldown reduction on any of your slots, such as your necklace, which it doesn't say that you do here, but if you roll a necklace that doesn't have these exact stats but has cooldown reduction, that can be quite valuable too, right? For my affixes, I'm first of all going to be trying to run Thorns wherever I can, so that would be the Amulet, Chest Piece, well, which would just be Razor Plate anyway. Pants, not so much, because you would generally be ideally running Blood Moon Breaches, but again, before you get that, you can definitely include Thorns as an affix on your pants. Next, for offensive related affixes, Essence Cost Reduction can be really nice on the Amulet. Tides of Blood passive is great on the Amulet as well. Movement Speed is good because it scales with the Vampiric power here, which scales up your attack speed with your movement speed. And then for your rings, you want to take Overpower damage for sure, Maximum Life, Blood Orb Healing, and Critical Strike chance. Blood Orb Healing benefiting your healing, which also helps trigger your Rathma's Vigor key passive, because overhealing can also reduce its timer or countdown. And then besides that, on your weapon, you want to take basically core skill damage, overpower damage, and stats, intelligence, and all stats. For boots, of course, movement speed is great, but you would probably want to run Flicker Step instead, or run Essence Cost Reduction on a legendary piece of boots, along with something like ranks to Corpse Tendrils and Blood Orb Healing, and of course movement speed. On gloves, you of course want ranks to Blood Lance, you want attack speed and overpower damage, and then a lucky hit chance to restore primary resource can be really helpful too. And last but not least, on your chest piece and legs, I didn't mention earlier, but of course, if you're not running any of these legendaries or uniques rather, you can run some of the defensive affixes, right? But in the case of an overpower build, you want to prioritize maximum life, and for the Blood Necromancer, Blood Orb healing is very good as well, right? So those two stats I would say prioritize, and then you can take some of the other damage reduction stats, on top of that. And then on your helm, I actually think going for some resists might be a good idea and also on the boots, because the helm and the boots are two slots that typically don't have as good of defensive affixes, although the helm can roll with maximum life. So in this case, you probably want to just roll with these. This is for max roll, or of course, this is from the max roll build guide, but instead of something like total armor, you can also consider something like a specific resist, especially if you're going to be farming like certain bosses and whatnot, right? Or like poison resist for Duriel if you haven't capped that already. Although you can also show up your resistances from your Paragon board and by socketing your jewelry with either diamonds, which give you all resist, or the respective colors for the respective type of resist. And for some other offensive aspects that you can pick up while you're leveling or progressing, Bloodseeker's aspect is decent as well, although it's not used in the final endgame version, but this is a dungeon aspect, so you can definitely pick this up. And then there's also the Hungry Blood aspect if you get to find it. Of course, the Gore Quills, which will actually be used later on in endgame. And of course, you can also choose to level with Blood Surge instead, because it's arguably a faster clear sort of AoE build, which is great for leveling specifically. For my Vampiric powers, I'm thinking to run Jagged Spikes, as I talked about before, for Thorns, damage, and synergy, and then Blood Boil for Overpower synergy to have slightly more AoE, and also to guarantee another Overpower every 20 seconds, very strong. And in addition to that, as I mentioned before, Anticipation can help if you're not running Decrepify Aura to reduce cooldowns with, and can, combine with Flicker Step, give you pretty high uptime on your Bone Storm. Next, I'm also running Hemomancy for some additional damage based on your maximum life, and also heal you. Healing can help proc your Wrathman's Vigor key passive, and the AoE from this seems to be decent as well. And lastly, here I also have Ravenous, which increases attack speed, and as you know, and this is based on your total movement speed by the way, so you want to get movement speed on your amulet, but anyhow, this actually allows or works well with Bloodlance, which scales well with attack speed of course. For Paragon though, this is also very largely based on the max roll version with a few slight changes. So first of all though, I just want to mention that of course you just want to take all the blood related and overpower related boards as well as glyphs and also nodes, right? So here we have the Blood Drinker node starting out, give you blood orbs, a chance to, allow your blood orbs to fortify you, which helps your overpower damage too. Here instead of Territorial, I'm taking Revenge to increase or to give another synergy to Thorns, multiplicative damage, as opposed to like Territorial, which is more of a defensive option, but does come with damage to close enemies. So Territorial is not bad as well if you want a bit more survivability and balance that with damage. But here, to go with the Thorns theme, I thought I would try this out. And then besides that, we're also taking the legendary node Bloodbath to increase overpower damage. Here for my next board, I have Blood Begets Blood. And by the way, the second board is Bloodbath. The third board is Blood Begets Blood. Here I have Corporeal to increase physical damage, which blood damage is physical. And the legendary node here is Blood Begets Blood, which increases your damage based on collecting blood orbs. Down here we have Scent of Death with the legendary node here too to increase your damage from corpses, not having corpses nearby or having corpses nearby to give you damage reduction. Here for the glyph, it's Dominate to give you overpower damage. And then last but not least, here we have Bone Graft. This is just like an easy connection to a node. Some other builds also use Bone Graft for this, but here we have the control node or the control glyph. So with that, this is probably my best attempt at making a Thorns build so far for the Necromancer. I think it makes a lot of sense to run Thorns with the Bloodlance build because again, the core aspects and gear that you would be using for Bloodlance are pretty much set, and you can still change some of the other flex picks into Thorns related gear pieces, as well as Vampiric powers and skill choices, as well as Paragon choices. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, whether you intend to try something similar or what build you're doing for Season 2. And with that, I hope this video was helpful or at least entertaining, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.